I'll be responsible for hosting today's session, and we'll take question and answers. So please put it in the Q&A session. I'm glad to welcome Shelby Mitchell, who'll be presenting on three numbers that matter in UX design, and they are not what you think. As a customer experience enthusiast, Shelby works to create meaningful, long term relationships between brands and customers of varying abilities. Her passion for exceptional customer experiences started early working with major brands in tech, retail, automotive, and financial services. Through her blog, The CX Cafe, she shares a unique approach to leveraging universal and inclusive design principles to improve user experiences and customer journeys. Welcome to the stage, Shelby, and yeah, take
Thank
it away.
you. Thank you. So let me just share my screen. Let me get that up and going here, and then we'll get started. Into presentation mode. Okay, perfect. So with the introduction, as mentioned, I'm going to be talking about three numbers that matter in UX design, and they're not what you think. So before we get into the numbers, I do just want to give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. So obviously, we'll go over the three numbers and why they're important. And then we'll talk about how they impact your brand and your user experience strategy. And then we'll also talk about strategies you can use to leverage these numbers. But before we get into the material, I know there was an introduction of who I am and what I do, but I do just want to share a little bit more about me before we get into the material this evening, or wherever you are, it might be morning for you. Um, but as mentioned, I'm the founder and chief blogger of the CX Cafe. My blog I started about a year ago. With the pandemic, one of the things that I saw was a lot of brands were having to pivot very quickly and really change how they engage with their customers. And it was interesting to see how some very large brands did some creative things, how some small brands did some creative things, mom and pop type um, businesses did creative things in changing how they engage with their customers. And so I wanted to highlight that in my blog, and then also talk about some of the common pitfalls that people fall into when they're working with their customers, when they're designing experiences. So that's really how the blog came to be. Um, and so if you're interested in checking it out after this session, feel free. And then it also mentioned in the introduction, I do have um, 15 plus years of marketing, advertising, and branding experience in a number of industries. And one of the things that I've found that is, regardless of the industry, your customer or your user may be different, and their needs may be different. But at the end of the day, when we design an experience, whether it's a customer experience, a user experience, um, we need to have something that works and that will carry that customer through a long-term meaningful relationship with our brand or our business. So that's something that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, the experiences that we're designing, we want to make sure that we're creating those long-term meaningful relationships. And then last but definitely not least, I am a mom of two boys. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Um, they're soon to be 3 and 5, so they keep me very busy when I'm not working. But the reason I share this information is I want to say probably about 4 years ago is when things changed for my husband and I, and not because of having our first son, but because we had we learned that he had suffered a stroke sometime in utero or shortly after birth. He was later diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Um, he has a rare form of epilepsy called ESES, and he also has apraxia of speech. And learning how he navigates the world and the journey that we've been on with him really got me interested in how I can work with brands, work with different companies to create experiences that are going to be more inclusive. So I really credit, he's too young to understand the impact that he's had on um, what I'm passionate about now, but um, it's because of him that I really started to look at how can we make experiences more inclusive, um, and address our customers, our users' varying needs, when we're designing. So now let's get to the three numbers. We've talked a little bit about me, but let's get to those three numbers. So the first one is 15%. So this is the percentage of the world's population that has some form of disability. And this number comes to us from the World Health Organization's um, World Report on Disability from 2011. And this number is important, particularly if you are a global brand, you do business in multiple different countries. It's important to understand that, you know, 15%, it could be more depending on the country that you're doing business in, um, has some form of disability. So we need to make sure that we're designing experiences for those individuals, or the experiences that we design include those unique needs. In our designs. The second number is more focused on the US, and that's 20% of the population of all Americans, so that's birth on up, have at least one disability. And this number comes from the United States Census. That's not the most recent one, but the previous census that was done. So the number could be a little bit different now. And then 26% of adults in the United States, so that's 18 on up, have some form of disability. And this is per the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the two numbers in the US are important because when you're designing user experiences, let's say you're designing a game or a toy or just some sort of experience for younger individuals, you need to understand that 20% potentially of your users may have challenges being able to engage with that experience. And then if you're designing experiences that are intended for adults, like maybe you work in banking, you work in insurance, maybe you're designing cars or gaming systems for older individuals, you need to keep in mind that 26%, so that's a little over 1 in 4 adult Americans have some form of disability where they may not be able to engage with you in that experience. Now, why are these numbers important? And I mentioned that a little bit in the previous slide, but these numbers represent a significant subset of your users. They're often presented with barriers to engaging with you. And these barriers can be physical, they can be digital, they can be service related, um, they can be many, many different things. But what's most important is that if users can't effectively use your designs you've developed, how can you build long term, meaningful relationships with them? And I mentioned that earlier too. Um, when we're designing experiences, every experience that we design should really be focused on creating or enabling those long-term meaningful relationships to where our users, our customers are going to want to continue to engage with us from the day that they first learn about our product or service or our experience, um, on however long that engagement or that relationship is meant to last. Now, how do these numbers impact your brand and your user experience strategy? So, of the individuals who have a disability, and this number is focused in the U.S. it's estimated that they have 175 billion in discretionary spending. And I use this number when I'm talking with people who aren't really familiar with um, inclusive design, universal design, um, because I think there's this misconception if you don't have that personal connection with someone who has a disability, there's this misconception that um, people with disabilities don't have jobs or aren't able to make a living, aren't able to live on their own, have families. And that's just simply not true. And I think this number really drives home that, yes, just because someone has a disability doesn't mean that they aren't able to work, they aren't able to purchase things and live full meaningful lives. And when we get into more of the digital experiences, um, we see that 9 out of 10 individuals who run into an accessibility issue on a website don't complain. So I've seen where um, I have, I've seen complaints um, regarding websites where there are very few complaints. Um, but just because one person complains, that doesn't mean that, there's probably 10, there's probably 10 more people out there that haven't complained. So just because you get one complaint, that doesn't mean that the problem is small. Um, it could be much larger. And then we get into the next number where 71% of individuals with a disability will abandon a website that's difficult to use, which results in an estimated loss of $14.4 billion per year. And this number comes from Forbes. And this number is important because you that 71% that abandons, they just stop. They don't even bother to go to another experience. They don't even try to find some alternative. They're just frustrated and they just give up. So um, those are dollars that are just not being spent because there were too many barriers for them to be able to take advantage of an experience. Um, and then the last piece is companies with inaccessible websites lose an estimated an estimated $6.9 billion annually to their competitors. And this is an interesting number, um, not only because, if you have an experience and it's not accessible, not only could the customer go to your competitor or the user go to your competitor, but they may actually be getting an experience that is, or a product or service that is suboptimal, something that might not really meet their needs. Maybe you really do have the best product or service out there, but your experience has created a barrier to where um, the user or the customer can't even get to take advantage of that. So they take something that might not fully meet their needs just because the experience to get to that product or service didn't have the barriers that your experience did. So now we're going to transition into strategies you can use to leverage these numbers in your user experience. This is just an overview slide. We're going to dig into each of these a little bit more. Um, but the four areas that we're going to talk about are one, auditing your existing user experience, and then two, identifying gaps and prioritizing opportunities. The third thing we're going to talk about is leveraging ADA guidelines, so the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we're going to talk about universal design principles. And then the fourth piece that we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth is involving users with varying abilities at all phases of design and development. So for the first piece, auditing your existing user experience, this can be done, really doesn't matter what size company you are. There's a number of different ways that you can audit your experience. And you'll have to figure out what makes the most sense, what your company has funds for. Um, but the different ways that you can do this is you can use an auditing software, or you can partner with a vendor. You can hire contractors or consultants to do the audit for you. And then probably one of the lower cost options is surveying and interviewing users. Obviously, if you're working with a vendor to do the surveying and interviewing, the cost may be higher. Um, but know that regardless of the size of your business, having a good understanding of where you are with your existing user experience is extremely important. Because if you don't know where your baseline is, you don't know how where to go up from there. The next piece is identifying gaps and prioritizing opportunities. So once you get that audit back, you want to review all those findings from your audit. And then you want to prioritize the opportunities in order based on the highest impact, the lowest effort. There may be some findings that are high impact, but they're going to take a lot of effort. They might take multiple teams. They might take um, infrastructure projects. And it could really be anything. Um, but you want to do the things that are going to get the highest impact as quickly as possible. Um, and then the third thing is you want to determine the timing to address each opportunity. And that may require you to, depending on the size of your company, you may need to talk to multiple teams and get various teams aligned with the timing. And then the fourth piece is work with those teams to get opportunities into your project workflow. The next piece we're going to talk about is leveraging ADA guidelines. So you want to make sure that you're following the Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines. Um, you want to also review and determine the level of web content accessibility guidelines if you're designing digital experiences. Obviously, if you're designing a physical um, experience or product, um, you would focus more on ADA. But the web content accessibility guidelines, there are different levels within those guidelines. You want to determine what level your company is going to commit to. And then while these guidelines, they're a great starting point, and they do provide a good foundation for where or baseline where we should be starting. There's more we need to do to create user experiences that are designed for all of our users and customers. And that's where universal design principles come in. So I'm going to work under the assumption that we have a mix of experts in inclusive design, and there may be some newer individuals who are participating in this session. So I want to make sure that we're all starting from the same level of understanding. But universal design at a really high level is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people without adaptation. Um, and that definition comes from the Center for Universal Design, the center or that created the principles. And there are seven that I have on the slide here. The first is equitable use. The second is flexibility in use. The third is simple and intuitive use. Number four is perceptible information. Five is tolerance for error. Six is low physical effort, and seven is size and space of approach and use. And while these principles have their foundation in architecture and civil engineering, the principles were really designed to or created to be used in many different ways. So, um, digital UX teams can use them. Facilities at a company can use them. Um, HR departments can use them in their hiring practices. There's many different ways that these principles can be used, and it's a great way for us to design our user experiences in a way that address the varying needs and abilities of our customers and users. And then the last big piece that I want to talk about, and I would say it's probably the most important piece, and that's involving users at all phases of design and development, and making sure that you're using or you're getting users that have various disabilities and abilities. Um, and there's a number of different ways that you can do that, and that's what the slide talks about. So the first is soliciting feedback from employees with various disabilities and abilities. Depending on your organization that you're part of, um, culture is going to play in here. If you are part of an organization like a Microsoft, um, they really do celebrate and um, encourage and have a focus around disabilities and celebrating the varying abilities of all of their employees. So getting feedback from an organization like Microsoft from employees is going to be a little bit easier than an organization that doesn't really have a focus around celebrating and designing for individuals with different needs and having different abilities. Um, However, that's not the only way that you can get feedback on your user experiences. You can also partner with nonprofit organizations that provide resources and membership for individuals with various disabilities. And there are many out there, depending on the user experience that you're designing for. Um, you can reach out to organizations that support individuals who have low vision or are blind. You can reach out to um, organizations that support and provide membership for individuals who have hearing limitations, mobility limitations. Um, there's really a lot of different options out there. Um, and then the next piece is soliciting feedback from your customers or actual users of the experience who have disabilities. So this can be done in your usability testing. If you're a larger organization, you probably have a vendor that you work with, or maybe several vendors that you work with. And when you're setting up your usability testing, you can say, we need to have, um, we need to make a conscious effort to recruit individuals with various disabilities so we can get good feedback to see if we're really addressing the needs of all of our users and customers. And then the last piece is you want to incorporate feedback into each phase of the design and process. Um, and I probably um, harp on this quite a bit, but um, you want to make sure the earlier that you involve um, varying individuals in that process, um, the better, because you don't want to get down to where you're ready to ship, you're ready to deploy, um, and you get that feedback. And if you do that, you're going to end up with the potential for a lot of rework. So the earlier I recommend that first prototype, that first design, have your users really focus early on, and then periodically throughout the different phases of your process to ensure that what you created is So just to recap what we discussed, I went over the three numbers and why they're important. So 15, 20, and 26. We talked about how they impact your brand and your direct strategy, and how having inaccessible designs can really create barriers to not only creating those long-term meaningful relationships with customers, but can also have a financial impact to your organization. And then we talked about strategies you can use to leverage these numbers. So having an audit, prioritizing um, the opportunities that come out of that audit, leveraging ADA guidelines, WCAG guidelines, um, universal design and inclusive design um, in your design processes. And then also, last but definitely not least, making sure that you're including users with varying abilities in your design and development process. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to join this session. Um, I have my contact information on the screen. So if you ever want to reach out to me, if you want to have further conversations, you can always email me at thecxcafe@gmail.com. You can also check out my blog, thecxcafe.com. And I also have a guide that I'm working on. I'm going to have it, it's a little bit more than what we discussed this session today. But if you're interested in that guide, you can just send me an email and say, "Hey Shelby, I'd like to get a little bit more information. Can you send me the guide that you mentioned at the conference?" And I'd be happy to send that to you. Like I said, I'm working on the final touches on that. So happy to send that over. Um, but I believe with that, we're going to open it up for questions. Oh, and then also when you get the I also have some additional resources that you can check out on universal design or on accessibility tags. There's some really great information that the AD Professional Network has. And then I also have connections with inclusive design.
Thank you. Thank you, Shelby, for the amazing presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. Now, Shelby's going to answer the questions that we have. Um, uh, Shelby, I think there's some audio issues going on at your end, like it's sort of cracking like a cable a bit. So if you
Okay.
could, yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the first question. So the first question says there are a lot of ability types to consider conducting a UX audit. How do you ensure all types of abilities are included? What resources or communities do you lean to get on to get a holistic feedback?
So yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's different ways. I think that's where soliciting feedback from different users, starting with employees. If you start a organization, um, like one of the organizations that I work for, we do have employee resource groups. One that's focused on empowerment. So being able to solicit feedback from the group.
Um,
Also, yep.
your audio is kind of cracking up.
Okay. Let me let me take my headset off and see if that works.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, that's way
Okay,
better.
all right. Perfect. So you can definitely lean on your employees. I would say the ones that are really big are, and where I see a lot of challenges are for the populations that have low vision, who are blind. What I see with user experiences not being ideal is the screen readers aren't always picking up all of the content that you're putting on your designs. There's also groups, there's a large neurodiverse population as well, where content, if you have too much content crammed onto a site, somebody who has dyslexia is not going to be able to engage fully, and they may even be using a screen reader. So I think you really have to focus on the large groups first. If you can get people who are low vision blind may have color blindness, and then also hearing is another big one. And then if you can start to expand from there, that's what I would recommend. I think, also with larger companies too, we've seen in the past year, a lot of companies have made an effort or a commitment to hiring a more diverse employee base. And I think, while many groups are focused on increasing the ethnic makeup of their employees, I think there's also opportunity to extend that conversation into individuals with disabilities, and there are companies that are doing that as well. And by doing that, that kind of changes the culture of the company to say, okay, we want to get those perspectives. And that's why I say, if you are a larger company where some of those changes are happening, you can lean on your employees, because it's becoming more of a safe space for employees to self-disclose that, yes, I have a disability and I'm willing, I want to share my feedback. So hopefully that helped answer the question.
Thank you. So we have another question. Has the ADA ever released guidelines in collaboration with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines?
It's really two separate things. So, ADA provides more, like, you want to make sure that you're providing equal opportunity for people with disabilities to be able to purchase things, and whatever, whether it's a physical or digital experience, that individuals are able to be gainfully employed, that they're able to take advantage of government services at the state and local levels. So ADA is very, very broad. And that's why I say it's a good starting point, but we really have to start digging in a little bit deeper and taking advantage of some of those universal design principles. And I know I didn't get into it too deeply here, and that's why I provided some of the resources, because there's a ton on universal design and how you can apply it in different ways. But WCAG really takes it a step further, particularly for web and mobile design, to say, here's what you need to do to hit, single A level. Here's what you need to do to hit double A and then triple A. I would say probably what's most feasible for many companies is double A. But again, it's something that's going to be a conversation that has to happen within the organization to commit to a certain level. So hopefully that answered the question.
So if anyone has any other questions, could you please quickly type in the Q&A tab? We are going to, maybe wait for 2-3 minutes and see if we have more questions coming up. Okay, so
Right.
thank you. It has been a great presentation. Thank you for answering our questions, and it was a pleasure to have you with us here. And and everyone, the resources are there, so please reach out to Shelby afterwards. And thank you all for attending. We have, of course, all enjoyed the presentation, and all of you can continue the conversation in the Slack channel. Thank you so much,
All right.
Shelby.
Thank you.
Thank you.